Okay, let's see if I can, let's see, I want to change the view here. Slideshow, is that what I want to do?
Yeah, you're showing this, you're displaying a slide now, but it's
Right, but I didn't want to display the stuff over on the side there also.
F whatever.
Yeah, I gotta tap something. Maybe it's view.
there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do that. Okay. So this is about the future of music, but I'm going to start with the past because to figure out where you're going, you kind of have to know where you came from. So these are the topics I'm going to try to cover this morning. So how music has developed, what changes are occurring now in music, and that's the music industry, the entertainment industry, music itself, how it's created and how it's consumed, how people receive music. So I'll be looking at how it'll be presented and created in the music industry in the future, as well as I'll start off with how music got started in our past. But the key is that developing technology is going to have big effect. It has had a big effect on music, which I'll demonstrate here in the next few minutes, and it's going to have a huge effect coming up even in the next couple decades, I think. So first it's past. First we had, the humans had song. I mean, that's probably maybe even before language. But we're not the only people who have song. We're not the only beings that have song. Humpback whales, for example, have fairly complex songs that don't repeat over and over like some sounds other animals make. Bird song, nightingales, for example, I think can invent different songs. Even elephants, there are elephants, when they get together in herds, they have elephant choirs sometimes, where they make different sounds together that sound kind of like music. They can produce sounds even that are kind of subsonic for humans, all the way up to fairly high notes. So anyway, human music consists of song, and then we have added various things to it: percussion, horns and reeds, wind instruments, and strings. And we've done that over about 40,000 years. The oldest known instrument produced by modern humans is the one pictured here, the Hohlfels flute, which is found in Swabia in Germany not too long ago, maybe a decade ago, in a cave. That's pretty interesting because the cave also, the deeper recesses of the cave probably were inhabited by Neanderthals at one time. But this was obviously carved to be a musical instrument with the finger holes. This particular instrument was made from the bone of a wing of a vulture. So it's backwards here, but the total length of it is about a little over 21 centimeters. It's the picture, the inset picture there shows about 7 centimeters of it. the my cursor, okay. The very oldest known instrument that have been found is another very similar looking flute, but it's about 15,000 years older than the other one. This was made by Neanderthals, and this was found from the Due Babe in Slovenia, and this was made from the thigh bone of a young bear, a cave bear. It's somewhere around 50,000 years old. This is the oldest known instrument that handmade instrument that we ever found. So music's been around for a long time. Let's talk mostly about Western music, though. That's kind of what I know. And it's not the only kind of music in the world, but it's the one we're used to. It originated basically with the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks were really into math and patterns and that kind of thing. And Pythagoras, for example, analyzed sounds. And the Greeks were familiar with the overtones. You can on a horn, you can sound a tone. The next tone up would be an octave above that. And that's because sound is made of vibrations in the air. And if you have twice as many vibrations, you'll have an octave higher. Okay. So the fundamental of any instrument is a single node of a vibration. The first overtone of that would be kind of an S shape that would have two nodes, and so forth. And those all have to fit within the length of the instrument. So the size of the instrument will determine the range of the notes that it can produce. The ancient Greeks were really into music. They used music a lot, and they were familiar with the overtone series. Pythagoras studied music, and he kind of thought that music reflected nature. So the Greeks, with their study of overtones, gave us, and through mathematics, they gave us the 12-tone chromatic scale. And I think they picked 12 because the way the overtones worked, but also 12 is a pretty special number to them. It's the first number divisible by 1, 2, 3, and 4. Kind of like 60's an important number too. It's the first one divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They created a scale based on 12 tones, which is our chromatic scale now. They also thought in terms of tetrachords, which were 4 notes in a row. They didn't have it perfected, but they had some idea of indicating music and writing it down. So they had the first kinds of notation that we know about for music. The kinds of instruments they had, lyres were important, and they had been around a long time at that point. They were from the Neolithic age. But they also had flutes, panpipes, sistrums, which is kind of a rattle type percussion instrument, rhythm instrument. And they also even had double reed instruments made from reeds, obviously. The 12-tone tuning system that Pythagoras came up with was based on ratios and integers, very mathematically based. It's interesting that the Greeks had music as a part of their lives, and Pythagoras considered music a mathematical expression of the cosmos, but he also thought it was important to learn. The Greeks established schools for learning music theory as they understood it at that time. Plato, for example, recommended music education, and he learned to play the lute and the lyre, and to sing. Although Aristotle and Plato were both against certain kinds of music. Plato thought music was important and you should learn it, but only certain kinds. Kind of like when we were growing up, our parents thought that rock and roll was going to corrupt the kids. That's what they thought about certain kinds of music back in their time. Who knows, maybe it did corrupt the kids. Okay, then we get into the medieval period, and a lot of the church at that time did not allow musical instruments. They thought they were associated with pagan worship and with the Old Testament, and they wanted to push the New Testament, Christian churches. So there wasn't a lot of instrumental music in the early church, but they really worked on plain song, which is chant, and Pope Gregory promoted Gregorian chant, and at that time they kind of improved on music notation. So they it was very simple, like one line and notes that went along the line, which was kind of a timeline at certain intervals or distances above or below that line to indicate the general idea of the melody. And at that time, they kind of formalized the modes that the Greeks had come up with. And they named these modes after Greek locations. There's Ionian mode, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. What we know as our major diatonic scale is the Ionian mode. What we know as the natural minor scale is the Aeolian mode. So our music derives from the Greeks and from the formalizations that were created in the medieval ages. Okay, so we have some notation. We have a little bit of technology coming in. About the 10th century, organs were invented. The first organ was actually water powered, but they did have rudimentary organs that could play maybe 8 to 12 different notes. And so organs have been around for well over 1,000 years. So the medieval music was basically monophonic. It was a song. When we get to the Renaissance, starting around 1400, then music becomes a little more intricate. You get polyphonic music. You can have two different tunes together, and they constructed so that they harmonize. They sound pleasant to the ear. That's a form of polyphony. Secular music during the Renaissance became popular. So, and especially because of the printing press, mass-produced sheet music became possible. So people could learn music who had never been able to before. So music became popularized throughout all of society because people could learn songs because the printing press made it easy to produce a kind of sheet music. Keyboards were around, at that time had improved, and harpsichords and advances in organs were made. Harpsichords are stringed instruments where the string is plucked when you push a key down. Sometime in the 1400s, trumpets, I should mention, had been around a long time. You know, they were one of the instruments mentioned in the Old Testament. But slide trumpets were created around the 1400s, and those were a single slide. You could lengthen tubing or shorten it. Later on, in about 1450, the sackbut was created, which is a double slide. It's a U-shaped tube that connects in two spots, and that was much easier to use than a single slide trumpet. The sackbut eventually became what we know as a trombone sometime later in the 1600s. But anyway, in the Renaissance, the printing press, keyboard instruments, polyphony, all contributed to more intricate kind of music. Also at that time, violins, violas, and cellos were invented sometime around 1550. Then came the Baroque era, starting around 1600. And that engendered more complex and difficult music, such as that created by Bach and Handel. At that time in the Baroque, modal music kind of supplanted the what was supplanted by more tonal music, tonal system, and there was more emphasis not on simple melody, but on chord progressions. Okay, so that's really when we hear something that sounds like modern music, more than the Renaissance even. You have chord progressions, and at that during this Baroque period, well-tempered scales were created. Well-tempered means the spacing between the semitones in the scale were slightly modified so that it would be easier to change keys and still be in tune. So you could have music that modulated from one key to another without having to switch instruments or something, using a well-tempered scale. So Bach, who wrote the well-tempered clavier and performed it, was one of the first to demonstrate these kinds of scales. Also, what happened was there was also more counterpoint and ornamentation of the music. The melodies became more complex. And that's because basically of the instruments, they were easier to handle. Trumpets at that time were still one length of tubing pretty much. And so the clarino style of trumpeting, which only virtuosos could do, was used because when you get up high on any instrument, the overtone series becomes closer and you can play more different notes. So with clarino trumpeting, you could play more notes, not just 3 or 4 of them of the scale, because you were higher in the overtone series. Bach wrote things like the well-tempered clavier, the Goldberg variations. Bach also wrote a lot of cantatas, oratorios, motets, and concertos. He was a great innovator of his time. He really advanced music during this Baroque period, late 1600s and 1700s. clarinet was invented somewhere around 1700. And the harpsichord was improved as a keyboard instrument by building the forte piano. The forte piano was the first to use hammers to strike the strings rather than plucking the strings. And that was a great advance because you could play loud or soft on it by what the velocity of the keys was, how hard you hit the keys. So that allowed more expression in music, especially with keyboards. And keyboards became a very popular instrument to use to compose music. Let's see, where am I? I'm still in the Baroque. Heading into the classical period, which ran from about 1750 to 1820 or so, the music had more clarity and purity. It wasn't intricate melodies so much as the focus being on the form and the structure. And that was Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven. Yeah, their music wasn't so filled with ornamentation as it was with clear, pure tones, tunes, and harmonies. And then in 1815, toward the end of the classical period, valves were invented. The engineering and the metallurgy improved to the point where valves could be used to change the length of the tubing in instruments, brass instruments in particular, quickly. So you wouldn't have to change the length of a tubing by putting a different piece of tubing in there. Brass instruments became important because they could then quickly play all the different notes. You didn't have to be a clarino player or be really or carry 3 or 4 instruments around in order to play all the different notes. So music evolved so that it could take advantage of those improvements in instruments. The Romantic period ran around 1820 to 1900, and that was Wagner, Chopin, Liszt, who I always think of when I go shopping, because I make my shopping list before I head out. At that time, intensity, individualism was important in music, and there was a focus on nature, supernatural things, and there were bigger orchestras because there were so many instruments now that could play in all different keys that they could bind them all together and it would sound good. Saxophone was invented then, which some people might think is a good thing, some people might not. Also the tuba. So there were more instruments that had bigger range. One thing I did skip over here was the pianoforte. I mentioned that the forte piano was created back around, what was it? 1700. And the pianoforte, which was like the forte piano in that it struck the strings, had improvements in it. It had an iron frame, so the strings could be put under about 4 times as much tension, so you could get a much larger range of loudness and softness. You could get very expressive music out of a pianoforte, and that's what we call a piano now. So these instruments, the improvements in the instruments allowed more improvements in what what composers could write for. They could write for much more complicated music, and their music could easily change keys, and the instruments would be able to handle that. So the technology and the music itself kind of went hand in hand. The piano, the forte piano, for example, also there was higher range. Forte piano had about 5.5 octaves. A pianoforte has 7 octaves, over 7 octaves. So when we get through the Romantic period, we get into the modern period, and that started around 1900, and there were many new styles and a lot of innovations at that time. It was kind of a new renaissance in music. In fact, it kind of paralleled the development of modern physics. For example, Stravinsky's Firebird ballet came out in 1905, the same time as Einstein's special theory of relativity. Stravinsky's Rites of Spring came out in 1915, same time as Einstein's general relativity. So there's a lot happening around that time. And there are parallels with music and science. Back in 1865, James Clerk Maxwell had created his Maxwell's equations, which gave us a new understanding of electricity and magnetism. And out of that, we started developing, exploring what we could do with electricity and magnetism, started developing electrical power and electrical circuits and so forth. And so around 1900, there was an explosion of electric and magnetic devices. And one of those was a phonograph. The first phonographs came out around 1900. And first records were 78s made of shellac. They were 10 to 12 inches in diameter, and they could accommodate music up to between 4 and 5 minutes long on one side. They could record it and play it back using these new electronic devices, the phonographs. So at that point, music really became democratized, you might say. This was the first time people could hear music without going and seeing a live performance. This was kind of a revolution in music. So around that time, in addition to just oratorios, choirs, and classical type music, we start getting early jazz, blues, swing, and in the early 1900s. And those songs all had to be between 3 and 5 minutes long, because that's what would fit on a phonograph record. So the technology kind of determined the kind of music we were producing at that time. Orchestral music, most orchestral tunes tended to be longer than that, and they really didn't get recorded very well until about 1948, when the 33 1/3 came out, the LPs, the long play records, which could accommodate more than 20 minutes of music on a side. I see Dean objecting. I'm not sure why.
Can I interject real quick? Because few of you know the word album. We all use it. My parents were audiophiles, and an album was an album of about 4, 5, 6 pages of 78s. And to hear opera or whatever, you would have to keep changing records.
Right. Yeah, you could do that, which was kind of a pain. It'd be nice to do it without having to have it interrupted. And that's what the 33 1/3, the long play albums did. They were about 12 inches in diameter, and the grooves were narrower, so you could fit four or five times as much music on one side on those. And then just a year after that, in 1949, the 45s came out, and they quickly became the most popular. They were about 7 inches in diameter. They were also made of vinyl, like the 33 1/3. But since they were smaller, they also could only fit about up to 5 minutes of music on a side. So again, the popular music remained 3 or 4 minute songs, maybe up to 4.5 minutes or so. So again, the technology is affecting the kind of music we were hearing at that time. So virtually all popular music was less than 5 minutes long back then. You could fit orchestral things and other longer pieces on the 33 1/3. So the kind of music we had in the early 1900s, as I mentioned, was like ragtime, blues, and jazz. Mid 1900s is when rock and roll, R&B, rhythm and blues, soul music became popular. And then later 1900s, we have hip hop and rap, electronic dance, alt rock, and all sorts of things, hardcore punk. And we also had movie film music and elevator and hold music. So music became more ubiquitous in our lives. Let me just get through this timeline, and then I'll take a couple questions. With this advent of electrical devices, we not only could record and play back music, but it also affected how we produced the music. We could amplify it. We could create feedback and loops and do auto-tuning and all sorts of things. We could manipulate the music in ways that we never could before. And that has become an important part of what we hear now too. House music, video game music, all that stuff has become popular in the last half of the 20th century. We also had electronic music, synthesizers, and concrete music, which is natural sounds recorded and made into music. One example that I'm real familiar with is the Dick's Sporting Goods commercial from about 2016 called Sounds of the Season. That was a bunch of sounds like squeaking tennis shoes and bouncing basketballs and that type of thing made into the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies from the Nutcracker Suite. My son did the sounds for that, so that's why I'm familiar with that. Right now he's a video game composer. The advent of electrical and magnetic devices has really changed music. It's made possible things that weren't even dreamed of 100 years before that. I'll take a couple questions. Go ahead, Tom.
Having been a disc jockey in the 50s and 60s, LPs came up to 18 1/4 inches in diameter.
Oh, I didn't know they were that big.
Those were very rare.
I know
Most
the old 78s were either 10 or 12 inches. They weren't all the same size.
no, they 10 and 12 were the common sizes. There were 9s. There were some 16s that were 33. Some of the very large discs played at 16 2/3 RPM, very slow. You got to play with this as an engineer. The audience never hears any of it. And the size of the CD was set by the director of Sony so that some particular orchestral piece he knew could fit on one side. I forget what the piece was, but it had to be that big, and that determined the size of the CD.
Yeah, the CDs are about the size of a diskette.
Yeah.
Diskette is, well, when I started in computing, there were floppy disks, which were, I don't know, 10 or 12 inches, and they were floppy.
12?
12,
Yeah.
yeah. And they were floppy. And then there were flippy disks, which were about 7 inches, and they you could wiggle them a little bit, but they weren't
8.
floppy. And
Yeah,
then came the hard diskettes. People were calling those floppy disks, but they weren't floppy disks, they were diskettes.
Well, the disc itself was floppy inside.
They were inside if you took them apart. They had a rigid case.
Yeah, they were rigid. So yeah, I was about to get into that kind of advanced reporting, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
So we'll discuss that a little more as we go on. Chris, do you have a question?
Things about the origin of music. Did music come about before language? Another question is there a genetic component to music? It is a universal quality. Is it hardwired in our genes? Another question is there an adaptive advantage to music? Another question is, music seems to be really hardwired to emotions. Is music an expression of emotion? Did crying come first and then music come out of that? It is so intimately hardwired with our emotions. It's so universal that there must be some primal source of it. Maybe the human heartbeat. Maybe that's where the first rhythms came from. So these are just questions I'm very interested in, the real fundamental evolutionary deep primal source of music.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has the answers to those questions, but we know that music can affect us emotionally, mentally, and physically. And it can harm us, or it can make us better.
Music is powerful.
It is.
In England, they did not allow the military to listen to certain types of music because it made the soldiers not want to fight. So that's another piece of evidence that this goes really deep into the human psyche, the fact that it has so much power. So these are interesting questions to address. If you're not going to, if just talking about the origin of music in its past, this goes back to like T=0.
Right. And as I mentioned, I think humans are not the only musical species on Earth either.
Yeah.
So music's been around for a very long time.
Yeah, good point.
I think humans, maybe language and music are related. They started kind of maybe at the same time. But I'm certain we had song and rhythm. I mean, clapping hands, stamping feet, whatever. At some point, people learned that if they used a stick on a hollow log, it made a cool sound. So we got more. We got tools that could create our rhythm for us, and once we started using different tools to produce music, it just took off from there. So we're a little different in that way, in that we don't just sing. We have other ways of producing music too. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I don't have the answer. The answer is 42, but I have some answers. And
Actually, if you went to Pomona University, it's a little different
yeah,
number.
yeah. But yeah, to Chris's, yes, I heard years and years ago about, when disco and da-da-da, and the 60 and 120 rhythm, beats per minute, is intimately related with heartbeat. The resting heartbeat of 60, let's get it up to 120, and etc. And yeah, music was around long millennia, hundreds of thousands of years, millions before humans, in birds, aka dinosaurs, etc., etc. And music most likely predated language. It was the language, and it is deeply emotional connected. And as you guys get older, you'll find out that for me, life starts to remind me of song lyrics and melodies, because those are ingrained from in vitro. That they know that the kind of music your mom puts on her belly and listens to affects your development in the womb. And yeah, there is no doubt about that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. One or two things I did want to demonstrate. The Overtone series, perhaps you're familiar with vuvuzelas. You see them at soccer matches, for example. They can play the fundamental, the one node vibration like this. But you can also play some higher overtones. A lot of people can't do that, but you heard the first overtone, the octave, the fifth, and then the fourth above that, which is the third overtone. And as you get higher and higher, the overtones get closer and closer, and you can get different notes. And once instruments were improved to be able to play all the notes, then music theory really took off, and people were able to compose more intricate music, which is kind of what I talked about. We got, starting in mostly the 20th century, we went beyond the 7 main modes and started developing a lot of different scales. Of course, we have the chromatic scale, which is all 12 tones of the scale. The diatonic scale, which came from the Greeks, is those 7 notes out of the 12 that are used in a pattern to create the different modes. And then we have lots of other scales that were invented since then. And maybe in a little bit I'll demonstrate some of them, but not on the vuvuzela because it doesn't have finger holes or valves or slides. Okay, let's go on a little bit here. Okay, now we're up to the present day, and electronics really determine the kind of music we hear. So a music producer will have these things in his office or his music studio. The main thing is this digital audio workstation. Then you have headphones and monitors to listen to the music. Have a computer to arrange all the sounds the way he wants to. A MIDI controller to convert sounds from a keyboard, for example, into his musical composition. I say his, but it could be his or hers. Audio interface plugins are pre-recorded sounds that you can add to your music. And then there are virtual instruments such as synthesizers, drum machines, samplers, and of course microphones and cables and all that stuff. So that's what a current type of sound composer would use. That's changing though, and it's becoming simpler because largely because of AI. AI can do a lot of this, combining different sources of music together better than, more efficiently than humans can in some cases. For example, you might remember the SAG-AFTRA strike, which happened about a year and a half ago. A lot of that was actors. And they were worried about one thing, was about AI using their images to produce things that, without the actor's permission, using their likenesses and not paying for it. And that also went for musicians. So using the performer's likeness, their voice or sound without fair compensation was an issue. And I'm not sure it ever got totally resolved. It
No.
got at least somewhat resolved. But with the advances in AI, it's becoming easier and easier to take samples or analyze a person's sound, voice, or whatever, and the AI, after hearing it enough times, will learn how to reproduce that pretty closely, and can reproduce a person's sound and claim, well, we didn't copy anything that they said, we just kind of learned how to do it. The AI learned it. So this can be a kind of a threat to the careers of musicians and musical producers. So this is still an ongoing issue, and I think it will be for a long time. Back to the technology of music itself, when you got in the late 2000s, late 20th century, late 1900s, with jazz and advances in orchestral music getting more complicated, more scales were actually invented. So I'm going to try to play some of them. Of course, the 12-tone chromatic scale is okay. 12 up, 12 down. And the diatonic major scale, which is the Phrygian mode. Okay, and the natural minor, the Aeolian mode. And there are all the other modes. There's also the probably about 100 years ago, people started using melodic minor, and that's it's the couple of the notes are raised up half a step while they're going up, and they're lowered half a step while they're coming down, is the melodic minor. And then we have, more recently, the blues scale, which is quite different. It's, some musicians don't even consider it a real scale. But that has, it's kind of like the Aeolian, but it doesn't have all the flats and sharps in the same spot. That has the flatted fifth and the flatted third and seventh, but it skips the fourth. So it's a strange scale. It doesn't have the second in it either. And when we get to the bebop era, the bebop musicians added one more note to the scale because it was easier to play a lot of fast notes if you had 8 of them to the scale instead of 7. So instead of the diatonic scale like this, they would add a note, and they're basically 2 bebop scales. One added a flatted 7th like this. See what other scales? There are a number of other scales that have been invented since then. One that was popularized by Ravel about 100 years ago was a whole tone scale, which there's a whole step between every note instead of half steps between some of them. So whole tone scales like this. Whole step between each note. So a lot of innovations because we had instruments that could play all the notes and still sound in tune with each other. So that's advances in technology with instruments has led to advances in compositional ideas of music. And that in turn has stimulated more ideas about what kind of instruments we can make. And the types of instruments really have proliferated even in the last, say, 50 years because of electronic equipment. We get synthesizers and we get all sorts of things that can make all kinds of different sounds. Let's continue on here. Now, talking about what can happen going forward. I have a couple videos to show which are going to take a total of about 40 minutes, so I don't want to spend too much other time here.
Stan has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Stan.
Well, the first thing I wanted to mention was that Jacob Collier, one of my favorite youngsters that's come up that does a lot of his own digital music, has perfect pitch. And he does a demonstration where he plays a note like a C and you get the third overtone, and he can sing that overtone perfectly, the third, which would be the E, right? And you can hear that it sounds perfect. And then he's at a piano and he plays the E on the piano and it sounds flat. So there is something about the harmonic sequence of notes and the way they actually have been formalized by some kind of an agenda for other reasons than harmonics. Because if you went strictly by harmonics, you get a lot of other messes in other areas.
Right. For a long time, composers used the equal tempered scale, which was the same space between each of the semitones in a 12-tone diatonic, a 12-tone scale. Then, as I mentioned, came the well-tempered scale, where not all the intervals were equal distance apart. And that allowed different instruments in different keys to play together. It allowed people to be able to modulate on the same instrument and still sound in tune with minor adjustments. Yes, we use a tempered scale, which is not exactly the equal tempered scale, which your friend was probably hearing in his head. So yes, for example, on a trumpet, when I use the third valve down low, I have to push out the third valve slide to keep it in tune. So there are things like that instruments still and composers are still dealing with.
Now, the other thing I was going to suggest is I posted on chat a discussion about oscillations used in electronic music. And it's interesting that all of these particular electronic musicians are using a very small list of very simple waves: sine waves, square waves, triangle, sawtooth, ramp, and pulse. And all of those can be combined to create Fourier conditions which simulate. I mean, there was a time back in the 70s and the 80s when MIDI was being in oscillators, Moog synthesizers. You had some music being controlled by oscillators and vibrators, and other musics that were just recorded in studios and then digitized into MIDI files. And those two kinds of electronic music competed with each other during the 80s and the 90s, kind of in a synonymous time frame. But one of the things that happened that was very odd for the music industry is that musicians don't like to buy Korg keyboards and Yamaha MIDI controllers and so forth. There's all kinds of brands. So all of these your companies like Korg and Yamaha and Sony and so forth, they all basically came together and created what they call a MIDI standard, or a general MIDI type, so that when you plugged in a flute and you expected it to be a trumpet, it didn't turn out to be something you didn't expect. The patching of the instruments were all basically confirmed by all music makers.
Yeah, there has to be agreement or there's total chaos. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, that was a long path, Stan, and I enjoyed it. I have heard, and hard to hear, that there are people, I mean, we all have overtones in our vocal cords, but there are people that can do, what's that called, Stan, where you put your finger lightly on the string without pressing the fret. But anyway, they can sing in harmony with one set of vocal cords.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, there are some well-known monks somewhere out in the Far East or something that do that. They might be Tibetan monks that can do that.
I think that Feynman wanted to go to Truvia to actually find the tribe that does that stuff.
And there are also people who can play wind instruments and hum at the same time and do that in harmony. So there's polytonality you can use with one instrument like that. So yeah.
Clark Terry comes to mind.
Clark Terry, yeah. I learned to play trumpet upside down, pressing the valves up the way he used to. It's not easy. Okay.
You're a different kind of dyslexic from I learned to read upside down, but oh
well. Let's see, where was I? This is okay, AI. Now, AI is going to affect music in many ways. Production, how we consume it, how we enjoy it, how we perform it. So I want to get into that a little bit before we run out of time. It's already 11. Okay. AI in music production. It's becoming more and more important and useful. Pros of AI in music production include cost efficiency and accessibility. You can do some things more quickly with the help of AI. It can generate sounds, kind of like a synthesizer, and create even AI voices royalty-free, as I mentioned, which was part of what the SAG-AFTRA strike was about, and generate music pretty efficiently. Now, what comes out of it may not be the most agreeable or the most imaginative type of music, but it can produce music pretty easily. AI can help music creators be more creative, perhaps, and have higher output because the AI can handle the technical aspects of mastering and composing, etc., allowing more time for the creators to create, try to implement different kinds of ideas. And AI can expand the palette of sounds available. And these are the plugins and that type of thing that I mentioned earlier. There's I have at the bottom of this screen a reference that has these pros and cons in it, if you're interested. Here are some of the cons. Quality concerns. AI really doesn't have the expression that humans can produce at this point. That will probably change in the next 10 or 20 years, but right now it lacks nuanced expressions and emotional inflections that humans can put into their music. Also, as I mentioned, there are ethical and artistic considerations about originality. Where did this actually come from? Is it stealing humans' output and using it to create its own output? The music producers have been polled about these kinds of issues, and it turns out that about nearly half of them at this point are neutral on whether it's good or bad, AI good or bad in music production. A little over 17% think it's a bad thing, but nearly 35% think it's a good thing. And that percentage, I think, is increasing over time. People are getting more used to using AI, and it can be very helpful. So there's growing acceptance of AI in music production. Voice cloning tech is getting more sophisticated, so it's getting harder and harder to tell the output from an AI from a human. And so what we have at this point is efficiency and innovation on the AI side, whereas on the human side, we still have more artistry and emotion. But I'd say the difference between AI and humans is getting larger on the efficiency side in AI's favor, and the difference in artistry and emotion is getting smaller. AI is closing in on what humans can do. They don't have emotion per se, but they can emulate it. And they're getting better at that. Dean, I think you're next for questions.
Yeah, real quick. So I think it was Chris or whatever said something about, is this human produced? If it was produced by code, produced by, well, that all depends on whether you call the Lamborghini crowd driving the I-210 in the Bay Area human. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, the thing about AI is it can learn on its own. If you give it enough examples, it can learn how to emulate those.
I understand that, and it scares the living bejesus out of me. So,
yeah. H-Town.
There's a website called Wings of Pegasus, where a guitar player and teacher uses voice and instrument modification tools to show how this works. How is not the right, show the results of this working, and how it is that I can sometimes hear a recording and say, that's not right. Because producers, how can I say this? Some producers seems to be slave to perfection. And if a performer is singing her heart out or his heart out, it's not sexist, and they happen to hit a note a little high and then slide down,
Right, right. Auto tuning
then
has become very popular, and I don't
and
like it.
you can, I at least can sometimes hear this. It is so egregious that it bangs in my ear.
I can always hear
Done
it.
done subtly, you can't really hear it because you use little tiny tweaks. But when you bring somebody down a tenth of a note, why, no.
Yeah, I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, auto tuning, maybe when it was just getting popular, maybe people didn't do it very well, or maybe they were trying to make it obvious for effect. I'm not sure, but
There is
that's
that.
what was happening. And let's try to get through these next questions quickly because I have 50 minutes or so and 50 minutes worth of material here. So go ahead, Stan.
Well, I've started, as a hobby, I was producing music in my basement. I have my own studio. I use a software called Studio One, and it has a software for doing pitch control called Melodyne, which is the Chevy Ford of Autotune. But it usually works post. I mean, Autotune is set up so you can actually tune a person in a live performance as they're singing.
Mhm.
Whereas Melodyne is more or less used in a recording studio where you fix the recording, the pitch afterwards. And for myself, there's another challenge to taking the vocal and elevating it too high because you start to sound like Kermit the Frog or a chipmunk, and so forth. So and I do that sometimes. I take it with my own vocals and elevate them so I can sound like David Crosby or Graham Nash, which is a violation of it gets cringeworthy to listen to. But what I've been able to do is one software will substitute my voice for another. It'll take my wave file, substitute it with another voice, and it sounds better. Or you can use another software called A Studio, which Tom, I think I sent you a brief on this. It will actually use MIDI notes and add the voice quality. You can take a MIDI note like da 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 da, and then put words in there. The sun is shining high today, and then you can create some expression on that. But that particular one uses voices as well. There's a library of 80 voices, some male, some female. And that's going to be very easy to control, and you can put emotion on it too. So
Yeah, there are a lot of tools like that now. My son, the one who's a video game composer, not only has perfect pitch, but he can hear the prevalence of certain overtones in each note. He knows which overtones are the most prevalent. So that's a real talent. But they matter. That determines the quality of the sound, what it sounds like. And also, as you mentioned, the sound waves, square waves, sawtooth waves. A whistle is probably the most sine wave-like sound with the smooth waves that we can produce. But a square wave sounds very rough. Now our electronic equipment can produce all those things because the electronics are fast enough that they can deal with the sharp edges of a sawtooth or a square wave. Dean, do you have something quick? You're muted.
Damn you, Zoom. I'm pressing my space bar, but I'm not clicked on the. Yeah, we have Cher to blame and thank for autotune, because I mean she is a pitch bender, and yeah, what I understand is she was really the first one, and then they go, oh, look at this, we can create artificial pitch bending in anyone's voice, and the rest is history. And yeah, I like it, but I also like straight up, guitar microphone done.
Yeah. Well, people love Frank Sinatra. He really didn't sing in tune very well, but if he were auto-tuned, he'd sound really bad. People like that, if it's not quite in
Tension.
tune sometimes, it sounds jazzier or something.
There's a tension there.
Yeah.
Yeah, nuance and tension, and yep.
Okay, the future music. Now we talked a little about production. Let's talk a little bit about the distribution of music and the consumption of music. And I want to go through this slide pretty quickly. We have spatial audio, which gives you 3D sound effects, interactive musical experiences, which I'm going to get into a little bit more later, virtual and augmented reality type of environments. If you go a little bit beyond virtual reality and augmented reality, we get into what people are calling the metaverse. A video I want to show you, they're going to talk about the metaverse fairly quite a bit anyway. Direct-to-fan platforms. This is the distribution of music, which is changing quite a bit. I talked about records. Radio came shortly after records, around 1920. Let's see, yeah, here we are. I'll get into the timeline in just a minute. Direct-to-fan platforms, blockchain technology. This is something new, and this is a way for people to monetize their production. NFTs, for example. Because streaming platforms pay a pittance. You can't make money by streaming your music. It might popularize you, but streaming platforms do not pay. Maybe, I don't know, hundreds of cents on tuners.
They pay someone millions.
Someone makes money out, but not the musicians, or the producers. Social media integration. So other social media are sharing music now too. And then this AI-powered music curation. This can help personalize. It tries to determine what you like and give you the music that you want. So there are, just in the last 20 years, the distribution and consumption of music has changed, particularly with streaming. So let's look at the distribution of music a little bit and a timeline. Before 1900, you can only hear music live. You had to go to a concert or something, or create it yourself. Then we had records, 78s in 1900, 33 to third, and 45s in 48 and 49. Radio came along about the same time. Actually, I thought no, that's incorrect. It's more like 1920, not 1901. Somehow that number got changed. I think when I was putting in these dates, it assumed I was trying to input a sequence of numbers and change that 1920 to 1901. And cassette tapes around 1962 were invented. And then in 1978, we started getting CDs, which is first time we digitized music. Up to then, it was all analog. Okay, so we had digital music starting in the late 70s. And 1999, streaming became popular as far as a way to distribute music. Napster was the first one, 1999. Then 2003 at iTunes and Pandora, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Spotify, one of the most popular now, came in around 2008. And Apple Music kind of supplanted iTunes in 2015. So with streaming, basically just about anyone can access almost any music that they want. Some streaming platforms don't have a lot of classical or a lot of jazz. They tend to lean toward the popular music, but you can hear just about anything you want. Okay. I'm going to show a short video here. Music is not only for entertainment. It can be used to heal because it can affect us emotionally, physically, and mentally. And the thing that I'll show you, which is only about 4 minutes long, we'll talk about that a little bit. But it can also be used to control or harm us physically and emotionally. For example, there are certain subsonic frequencies that, if they're loud enough, will cause you to lose control of your bowels. So there are things that sounds and music can be used to control you in a way also.
When you say subsonic, you mean below 20 beats per second?
Yes, below our hearing, yes. And 20 hertz is about the lowest tone we can hear. Depends on how good your hearing is. Now, I mentioned here also generative and ambient music. Those are becoming more popular. Generative music is basically AI created, and it can continually create music and not repeat itself. So generative music is continually being generated, and it doesn't repeat itself like most popular music does. It has an AABA form or something like that. And ambient music is background music that's usually intended to soothe people or something like that. They're different things. Generative music has a kind of different purpose from ambient music. So I want to show you this YouTube.
Okay.
I'll have to stop sharing this.
Carol has her hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Carol.
Yes, on the subsonics, between where you can hear them and where you lose bowel control, they also have an area where they create acute anxiety or fear.
Yes.
And I have been told you can do things like if you're in a theater and you're playing a horror movie, a scary movie,
Yes.
you can play something in that mid-subsonic range and everybody's scared and they don't know why.
There have been, I saw it, I forget who invented it or what the instrument is called, but an instrument that is made to produce scary noises, and it has been used in a number of films.
Yeah, but this is scary, unheard noises, subsonics, but
yeah.
producing anxiety and fear.
They can shake your seat.
Exactly. Yeah, that was a big deal.
Yeah, haptics is I'm not going to get into that very much, but with the AR and VR stuff, the musical experience is not just musical necessarily. Okay, I want to show this one. This is a 4 or 5 minute thing.
Sorry, was it just me, or do I have a new kind of hearing loss? I couldn't understand a word that guy said. It sounded like it was on a 1200 baud Hayes modem.
Oh, sorry. Did anyone else have that?
Guys, welcome back to the channel. On today's video, I'm going to try
Hold
my
on.
best to answer this age-old question. Should you throw urethane on?
We don't want to hear about bowling balls right now. Okay. Let me see if I can get back to my PowerPoint.
When I went in for a surgery for my carpal tunnel, the physician doctor gave me a headphones and asked me what my favorite music was.
Yeah, what'd you say?
I said Steely Dan. He said, I can't have that. I said, okay, Beatles then.
So he gave you what you wanted.
Yeah. I think he was using Spotify. I'm not sure.
Okay, so anyway, this last YouTube is that link at the bottom of this screen. Nah, I'm not going to do this. I don't have time. This is a 2 or 3 minutes of kind of weird sounding music that may or may not be what might be developed in the future. It sounds a little bit like some of the video game music you hear these days. But I do want to show this this video, which is an interview by Nora Young of 3 people who are music related. How we will experience music in 2050. It's pretty interesting. It's almost 55 minutes long, but I'm going to try to cut out at least 20 minutes of it and see what we can learn from these people, because these people have some interesting things to say. So I'm going to try to bring up that video if I can find my cursor. So there we go.
Tom, if I have to leave early, do you mind if I pass the host to you?
Gosh, I don't know if
You
I'm
can pass it to me.
both and trying to present, that might be hard.
You
Okay,
can pass
Tom.
it to me.
Tom Trice, you'll get it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Let's see, why is this not coming up? Oh, there it is. Okay, now this is not a video, this is just audio.
On McGrew, musician and AI innovator.
Okay. But I will have to, I think I'll have to share it in order for you to hear it.
Yeah, because then we'll be getting it through your speakers.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be very good. Okay.